This is going to be like a very not awkward transition. We're just going to transition into a conversation. I want to invite my dear friend Tucker Culbertson to join me. Tucker is, besides being one of my dearest friends and collaborator, he has been credited with directing many of these monstrosities that I've created over the years. And so I'm so very thrilled and blessed and blessed. That sounds very Christian, doesn't it? Well, the thing about being a devil-worshipping free black man in the blues tradition is that, yeah, you can't get away from Jesus so easily, yeah. I mean, I grew up in the black church, and so, you know, yeah. And I'm a Southern Negro, too. I grew up in Alabama. That's the whole thing. Are there any other Southern Negroes in the house? You know, did you grow up in a black church in the South? No. It's a whole thing. Are we going to use these mics or those mics, or which mics? Okay, great. Yeah, I can just use this one. No, I like microphones. He's very, I'm gonna pass this over to Tucker while I just make a costume.
Hello. My sincere thanks to Sebastian and everyone else for allowing us to be here, and of course, my thanks to Lamar for the performance just received by us.
And so, okay, I won't do that. We had this, Tucker's a proper academic. I think of myself as like as an intellectual, but I'm not a scholar really. I'm just an artist. And so Tucker, in preparation for this conversation.
Why are you gonna tell them what I am?
Okay, you can tell them what you are, but my point, I want to make a point about, he sent me this very long, detailed email about all of the things that we could possibly talk about. It was like pages and pages and pages, and I thought, I appreciate the rigor of that particular program, but I thought, well, I think we should just talk. I mean, it's important that Tucker is someone that I've been working with for a very long time, collaboratively. Many of the research ideas that I find with this piece, I was working on this piece for like years really, and we were talking about it, we were in conversation, and I was sort of like talking about Foucault and panopticons and Frantz Fanon and sort of internalized racism, and trying to sort of make a show about those things, but about prison too, because there's this sort of like phenomena of black people in prisons in the United States. And then Tucker said to me, well, do you know Willie Francis? And I said, well, no, I don't know. And he just sort of mentioned it. Yeah.
Is that name familiar to those in the audience at all?
Well, because, hi, Lisa, I've told you the story many times. Do you want to tell the story of Willie? I mean, since you were the one who introduced this to me, and I originally, so Willie Francis was this black boy in St. Martinsville, Louisiana, who was executed twice, respectively, in 1946 and 1947.
He's the only individual in United States history to be twice submitted to the death penalty. The first time didn't completely take. Reginald is correct, Lamar is correct in a sense, and I'm referring to him as a boy. He was 15. He was 15 at the time of the alleged murder. He, as many black male defendants at the time, was represented by appointed counsel at trial, which presented no defense, presented no witnesses, and he was convicted and sentenced to death without a weapon and without physical evidence or a witness. The first execution failed because the device was incompletely attached.
The police officer was inebriated. He'd been drinking. Who installed because the electric chair at that time would travel from different cities throughout the South. Okay.
And in any case, though a petition all the way to the United States Supreme Court was presented, arguing that surely now this still very young man whose trial was laughable, whose guilt was certainly not beyond a reasonable doubt, and who was seriously intellectually and physically disabled from this first incident, surely to continue with the execution would be cruel and unusual punishment prohibited by the Constitution. The court declined to answer the question, and so he was subsequently and successfully killed.
And when I started looking into Willie Francis' story, I found that the man he's accused of killing, it's alleged that he was having a sexual relationship with that man. This was a 53-year-old white pharmacist. I can never remember his name. Thomas something or other. I mean, it's on the internet. I always remember the black people's names and not the white people. What is wrong with me? And I became...
Oh, because I was going to start answering.
Oh, of course.
What's wrong with you? But it's not that.
That was really rhetorical. We don't need to really go into. I mean, clearly, everyone just saw what's wrong with me.
And it's what's exactly right with you, of course.
And so I was less interested in the fact of him being executed twice, and was more interested in what this relationship was like. And in 1947, in Louisiana, would have been 14, 15, like maybe 13, 14 at the time, boy having sex with maybe a 53. I just thought that was just bananas. And then I thought, well, I don't know if I can really incorporate this into the show because I'm trying to do all this other. Anyway, it sort of made its way into the show.
And yet, and if I may impose just a touch of form, it seems to me that what we're doing is discussing, in the context of a school of art, the process by which the work of art we've experienced came about. It involved, as you say, an interest in the theories of discipline and punishment from Foucault, and the deep insights regarding decolonizing psychoanalysis by Fanon and internalized racism that has concerned you. Both are so clearly visibly located in sites of incarceration which extend beyond the prison.
Yes, yeah, we're getting to that.
But I'll just remind you and share with you all that there was another separate, it seemed at the time, separate thing that was on your mind.
Oh, that's right, I always forget that part.
And that thing was, you said to me, I wonder what heteroracial, homosexual fucking between men on the plantation was like. Because it was definitely happening. Yeah, that behavior is very old. The terms like gay and those things are very new, but the behavior is very old. And your question was, although we might not, I mean, it's certainly as old as it was. If it was ever prohibited, it was happening. But your question. And then there's this whole thing of, I keep thinking, imagine if you owned people. I mean, one of my favorite films is Salo by Pasolini, and it's based on 120 Days of Sodom. And I've always been in this thing of like, well, on a plantation, imagine if you owned people, and then people have these freaky kinds of things they like to do generally. But if you owned people, I mean, you could just subject them to all kinds of sexual fantasies and proclivities, and it just much like what one might do with, for example, although ownership here is only metaphorical, a child. Yes. Today. Yes. And so the question, though, that you pose, though the interactions of a sexual relationship between two self-identified males, across one race, black and enslaved, one white and free, on the plantation, although that could never be fully discussed beyond it being a matter of rape. It couldn't be placed beyond that. Might, though, you ask, it be placed beside it? Might, in the conditions of abjection and enslavement that were permanent, might there not be, as we see in the section of the piece entitled Overseer, some pleasure, some romance? I was horrified, I have to say, because I'm a kind of knee-jerk reactionary. I'm not a white guilty liberal. I'm more of just a amateur race trader. But so it makes me, that made me uncomfortable, and so I knew it was going to be very productive. That sexual work echoed itself in the alleged narrative. I want to be very clear because I imagine in some ways this is important to the family of young William Francis. The allegations about his relationship with his employer, this 53-year-old white Francis, none of this is known to be true.
He
We are
referred
not
to it.
speculating, and no one is suggesting anything about an actual person, but rather echoing a series of, it seems to me, sexual as well as physically exploitative, violent intimacies, specifically among men, but also among African Americans themselves, who have, as you speak to in the piece, and I would like to hear more about why you started with Jamie Foxx on these people, right? Who have inherited, you seem to suggest, a legacy of that violent, that sexual, intimate drive towards consumption and destruction.
Spike Lee had a moment recently that many people objected to when he was referring to Black Lives Matter, and he said, well, you know, a lot of us black folks are killing each other. I mean, we got to talk about that too. And I mean, I was with the chorus of people saying, you know, maybe that's a good point, Mr. Lee, but Black Lives Matter but Black Lives Matter is a very poignant, for me, I find very poignant and important moment. But there is this deeper question of of us just being deeply and profoundly psychologically and emotionally fucked up. I mean, I think that as black people, and I mean, I don't want to offend any black person who doesn't believe that they are fucked up or that they have fully decolonized their minds, because, you know, and if you have, please come talk to me about your strategies of how you've done that, because I would like to know. I mean, I do a lot of work on this for my own personal, you know, thing, but there is, I think, alongside, and I think this is actually happening in Black Lives Matter, and I think this is Spike Lee didn't sort of show a kind of knowledge, that there is a kind of a decolonizing process that's happening, and there's a need to sort of address the psychological and emotional devastation that we exist under in imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, right? That there is a need to fully address that. And so I'm always in my work trying to sort of like be in this place of addressing this place of healing. And I mean, I have an unfair—
Jamie Foxx.
I have an unfair advantage in that front because I'm doing music, and music, I think, you know, is ultimately a very healing thing. But the Jamie Foxx, thank you. See, we're gonna take this show on the road. He's very useful. When I'm doing this alone, I'm a complete mess. But I think we're doing this in LA, this like little conversation. We're doing this for this new piece I'm working on called The Funeral Doom Spiritual. But Jamie Foxx was important. Like, I guess that was 2005 or something. For some strange reason, I was watching the Academy Awards. I mean, I really, really never watch these things. But for some reason, I was watching, and then he got up and sort of started talking about his grandmother beating him and whipping him, and then there's like this pan over to, what is that black man's name who driving Miss Daisy guy? I'm sorry, it escapes me. Morgan Freeman, yeah, oh my God, yeah. I have so much trouble with Morgan Freeman, I just do. But there's this moment when they pan to him and he's sort of laughing, and I just thought, this is so in the moment.
The longer quotation from which this edit is beautifully cut and drawn. Jamie Foxx takes the stage and he says, I want to thank my first acting teacher, my grandmother. She taught me how to act right. She taught me how to act like somebody. She taught me how to act like you've got some sense. She taught me how to act like you've been somewhere. And she would beat me. And she would whoop me.
If I was acting a fool, yeah.
And if I was acting a fool, and I'm glad she did. Now, I'm not, that's
my only point in bringing this up is in the moment I thought the message seemed to be that in order for black people to succeed and to be in these high moments of achievement, we need to be beaten down. We need to be beaten into submission. And I mean, on one level, at a certain point, that was perhaps useful in terms of existing in imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy in order not to die.
Well, you conceded that it might even be very true today, and still, that's an unacceptable fucking option, is what your response, as I recall, it was.
Yes, I think that's extremely unacceptable. I think that the idea that we, in order to, I mean, there's a difference too between succeeding and being free. Often, in order to be free, you can't succeed by the matrices of the existing system. And perhaps if you'd like to succeed in the way that Jamie Foxx is succeeding, then you needed to have had someone, disciplining you in a very particular kind of way. But if you'd like to be free, perhaps you won't succeed in the way that Jamie Foxx did, but perhaps you'll have other kinds of joys in your life.
And this is where great care has to be taken, I think, in discussing intra versus inter racial traditions, practices, experiences, insofar as it's certainly common among white people, like very much like myself.
He's a Southern white person, by the way. He is. I'm a Southern black person. He's a Southern white person. You also. I'm going to interject just because you might be wondering. Well, no. Go on, Tucker. Well, I mean, what is this? What's this white dude up here like talking about this? I mean, you might be. Some of you might be. Are you wondering that? I love you. I love whoever you are who said that. I mean, he.
I didn't hear the answer yet.
Someone. Yes, they said yes.
I just can't
They said yeah. They said yes. Who screamed yes? Yeah. He has done lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of research and scholarly work on the question of. This isn't inaccurate in terms of race. He is a professor at Syracuse University in the School of Law, but you teach your constitutional law class from the point of view of, I think, of race, right? I mean, is that fair?
I'm a constitutional law professor and a critical race theorist, but the reason that
Yes.
ended up being what I do to make money is because of, and none of this ameliorates or at all minimizes the conspicuous and important dimension of my whiteness in regards to this conversation. But the reason that became what I do for money is because of my deep and intimate connections and relations with black people I love deeply from a young age and an environment where that had very severe consequences.
Well, and I also think that there's a bigger question in this discussion sort of looming over our relationship and in bringing our sort of collaboration public, is what does it mean for, a Southern Negro and a Southern cracker to sort of get together and try to sort of like make community, to make work.
And why, and just why? Not what does it mean, but why, for what, right?
Well, I mean, I think we love each other a lot. I think there was a deep and profound love, and we both also, I think, not like, my boyfriend's over, it's not that thing. My boyfriend was actually
here. I don't want y'all to misunderstand.
doing, he was doing the visual stuff. Sabin, Calvert, everyone can give Sabin a hand. All the visual stuff you saw was the result of Sabin. But I think that besides the fact we love each other, we also love justice, right? Or the idea of justice. Is that inaccurate?
I just make faces. Just you don't have to.
But I think that we're also deeply, that our primary obsession are these historical questions of race in the United States and these contemporary questions and how these historical questions connect to these contemporary questions. And there's always a then and now and now and then and then and now. Unfortunately, this is all the same as it was. The slave ship to me is much like the prison. So anyway, I interrupted you in the middle of making statements about.
It's never an interruption. Truly, my purpose here and my purpose involved in your work at all is as foil, occasionally midwife and support. And that's not to diminish myself. I think all of those roles are
very
absolutely
important.
to be lauded. But so there is no way you could interrupt me.
Well, I also think that Tucker's role in the construction of my work over the years has been essential
So let
for
me
me.
essentially construct this conversation for just 1 second.
Okay. Is everyone with us? Has everyone gotten lost in these rambling ons? Have you gotten lost in this?
Right.
I'm sorry? A little bit?
So let me just try to offer from what I've heard. Right, what I heard from you.
Okay.
Right. What I heard from you that there was an interest in dealing with internalized racisms, in dealing with, right, specifically sexualized and intimate violence, both intra and interracial, and connecting and drawing not a metaphorical but a literal lineage between the brutalities enacted as technique of enslavement and those enacted presently either as methods of punishment or ways of rearing and ways of trying to protect even young black men in a world where death, as you said, always seemed close by. That's what I've understood.
So, I mean, where you do have questions about our relationship in terms of collaborative things, were you lost in that, or that seems fairly clear, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's reasonable to ask whether you or anyone has something to say, to ask, etc.
Yeah, we could, maybe this is the point when we open it up for, I mean, I have so many things to say, but we can open it up for questions if anyone would like to ask a question.
And responses. It
or
can
responses,
be a single word, it can be a sound, it can be, obviously, exiting is one form of response that is available to you at all times. Nobody takes that personally. I'm not going to go on thinking about you. So, are there things you'd like to share?
We've got someone standing up in the back. I'm excited about that. This person is anxious to ask me or Tucker something.
First, I'd like to thank you for that performance. That was awesome.
Thank you.
And my question or statement is rather, what effect do you think that kind of violence has on double consciousness of being black in America? And how do you think that relationship, because they're obviously connected, but what do you think the psychological steps are that make that so connected, I guess?
That make it so?
So connected, violence and double consciousness, the history of violence, the history of slavery.
Well, I appreciate your, I mean, when she is referring to double consciousness, everyone knows that she's referring to W.E.B. Du Bois's sort of notion that the Negro, as he said at the time, I like Negro, I still use Negro. The Negro has to exist within the consciousness of what it means to be a Negro in America, as well as the consciousness of what it means to be white in America, that we've always held both things at the same time.
And I think, but and to put a slightly finer point on it, to exist as a Negro in Negro communities and in rooms, and to exist as a Negro in white spaces, or as Dave Chappelle calls it, job interview talk and family talk, right? That consciousness, I think, actually complicates the picture that you present of the white man's eyes inside me, the watchtower inside me, in the context of an isolated individual with zero contact with anything except his own voice and that looming, powerful set of eyes. But when you're walking out in the world with that, managing double or multiple consciousness, when we start talking about intersectional identities, et cetera, how does one, right, start managing that without falling apart? How does
I mean,
one?
it's interesting because I'm not, people always think that I'm being very autobiographical. I'm usually not, but I'm going to be, at this moment, I'm going to talk about how I've dealt with that. I mean, there was a time when I was in very elite institute. I guess Yale. I mean, I guess Sebastian said something about me going to Yale and then dropping out. I mean, for me, I'm just not interested in existing in a doubleness. Like, I don't really change the way that I speak or present myself at any time. The way that I've dealt with it is just to sort of try to form an identity that makes me feel comfortable with myself and that allows me to live with myself. Yeah, I mean, so a double consciousness, I mean, there's always an awareness of, racism or what someone might be thinking. I mean, I honestly, I feel much more affected by the internalized racism of other black people, who have a response to me sort of in public spaces, because I you know, those of you who know me know that I don't have a special way that I look when I perform, you know, that's different than the way I look when I'm walking down the street. Like it's just, this is what you get, you know, whether it's on the street or here or, and so code switching, like Mills Perry always talks about code switching, like black folks doing that all the time. I mean, I know what all that is, but that's just not interesting to me. Like, I'm just not interested in being, adaptable that way, but I also haven't like had a job, you know, a conventional job in quite a while. My last job was bartending. I did that for 5 years, and I didn't.
And yet, what I will interject though, right, and this is distinct from double consciousness, but we can suggest that it has something to do with the reality of, as Fred Moten says, as an African American, never being on the right side of the Atlantic. You go there, and you're from here, you're here, you're from there, deep, yeah. Right? Never being able to be on the right side of the Atlantic, and thus having double influences. So while you may not engage in code switching or job interview talk, right? And I understand that's a reductive representation, but nonetheless, this radical political work and this deep investment in blackness that manifests itself through what you call the Negro Gothic aesthetic involves classical European musical stylings of opera and vocalization technique. It involves solo performance and auteurism, and is often presented in rooms like these at places
that are predominantly
like this,
white places,
and largely, when rightly funded, because the work's greatly rightly funded, when funded, largely funded by and presented by historically and demographically white owned and operated institutions. Now, that is not saying something about you, but when we talk about, when you sing about getting free, not being subjected to the gaze, and when in other pieces you talked about, you have a line from the song Badass Nigga, this ain't no tap dance, coon show, niggeration, this ain't no fierce queen, miss thing, faggotration. I'm a badass nigger with a bad attitude, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, and fuck me too. Now,
I like it when you say that. That's really fun. It's fun.
And so there is, though nonetheless, the matter of your work being presented often at the behest of, often for the eyes and ears of, arts communities, universities, etc., who ask you to sing and play and let us hear your voice and see your body. And I think that is complex.
I mean, it is just the condition of the black performer in the U.S. context. I mean, it is. I mean, you know, Miles Davis was playing a European, you know, instrument, the trumpet. I mean, to my knowledge, right, the trumpet is from Europe, and is usually, you know, part of classical, you know, orchestra situations. I mean, the black people have made a thing here. I mean, it's very exciting and very intimidating to be a musician a black musician in the American context, because, you know, like, it's just a real intense tradition of just great people, and you're just kind of like, well, I guess I just can't think of myself relative to Cecil Taylor or Miles Davis or John Cole. I mean, you just would stop, you know, or Leontine Price or Jesse Norman. You know, you just would have to not make music if you know, thought of yourself in those terms. One of my favorite, when you were talking, I was thinking about Screaming Jay Hawkins, an album he released, and everyone knows him, right? I Put a Spell on You guy. He released an album in the 80s called Black Music for White People. One of the things I love about Screaming Jay is he's so irreverent. I mean, he was a very free Negro. I mean, that Negro was he just did not give a fuck. Yeah, I just aspire to that, you know, just to be.
And when you say that the making of the work, right, and the addressing of, and even engaging in a certain kind of physical acting in terms of your style of piano, the putting of a certain kind of force, I won't call it violence, but the putting of violence in text, putting a force on keys and strings and organs is a way of reconciling conflicting tensions. And as far as the European traditions, et cetera, that I mentioned, you bend them, you break them, you make them your own, in the same way that the current project involves drawing upon the themes of rapture and revelation and destruction of the earth from conventionally upbeat Negro spirituals.
That's a new piece, by the way, called Destruction that I'm doing at Abrams Art Center in January, if anyone would like to come see that new piece. Brand new. Actually, Tucker is probably co-writing that new piece in a way that he hasn't for
it seems to me
former
that
pieces.
this
Yeah.
is, because one of the questions I have for you always is, as Sebastian introduced you and says that you are a free a black man, that this is how you are forever becoming free, creating a self that doesn't come to the piano or the notebook or the morning already assembled as decolonized, but in a sense is forever becoming.
Well, and decolonization is never a thing that you just do and then you're done. It's like a constant kind of reevaluating and reassessing your positionality relative to the dominant culture. Did I answer your question at all? Did we? No, I fear we didn't. That violent history, and I mean,
Well, one of the, I think, connections is that it's that violent history that compels a certain kind of double consciousness, or else you suffer that violence in the present.
Can you use your mic, please?
oh
Please.
yeah.
I think that one of the answers, it seems to me, is that the connection is that violent history is what compels the creation and performance of a double consciousness in the present, lest one suffer that violence in the present.
What do I think about the connection between the violent history and? I mean, I think we're always living that. I mean, there's. I mean, we've gotten to see on videotape like numerous black people assassinated in the last. I mean, like this piece I wrote. I started writing this piece maybe in 2011, 12, and we did the first workshop of this piece before Trayvon Martin was shot. And so I mean, I only know that moment because it was a moment of awakening, not for black people, because black people have been acutely aware of the violence inflicted on black bodies via the police, via the state, via prisons for a long time. And back in the 70s, Red Fox was making jokes about the police, relative to like stopping black people, and Richard Pryor was making those kinds of jokes in the 70s. I mean, this is not a new thing. But the rest of the country, when Trayvon Martin happened and then Mike Brown, I mean, so many of these things, the rest of the nation, the white America, or I guess the in denial bourgeois, but actually you can't even be a bourgeois black person in denial, because particularly if you have a very nice car that you like to drive, about what the reality of being black in America means relative to the police state. And it always has been a police state, I think, for black people. You can just go to Harlem and see the number of police who are at 125th Street versus the number of police who are at 77th in Lexington on the Upper East Side. So, I mean, I think that, but I think maybe acutely, to answer your question, I think there's all varying responses. There's anger and rage. At a certain point, Cornel West was talking about a kind of black nihilism around this connection to that history, kind of since there is no point in existing in this world, I will destroy myself and the rest of the world. And there's always been this revolutionary bent. So there's always been, I think, a self-destruction that black people have been engaged in with themselves, in their communities. And it's about a rage that doesn't have a voice, that self-destruction. And then there has always been the movement happening. But the movement has never, ever been a majority of black people, right? It's been, more, I mean, the bougie black folks are just trying to be bougie and comfortable. You know what I mean? Like, they're not on the front lines, like trying to advance stuff. So I mean, that's deep, your question about this double consciousness and this connection to violence. And I mean, it's a thing that we have to have a whole, maybe a seminar about or something, like maybe for those who teach classes like Tucker, have a year or a semester or something where we talk about that. Or were there more questions? Did people have other things to say? Sebastian, we'll get to you. I mean, these are really, yeah, these are just central questions for me, all of these, and I try to address them in the work and try to create a space in the work of mourning and healing, hopefully, and acknowledgement of certain kinds of violences. Because I think that if we don't acknowledge that they're going on, I think a lot of people don't even know certain kinds of violences are going on. So there has to be the acknowledgement of it. It's like going to AA or something. I am an alcoholic. You have to sort of acknowledge the extent to which we are sick with this thing of white supremacy. And we have to say their name. And then, you know, that maybe can begin a process of healing and or liberation. And there's an abolitionist thing that has to be going on with the same, that sort of like thing happening on the front lines in Chicago right now. I think there has to be like almost a self-help movement for black people going on at the same time, where we can like see each other and love each other. I mean, I think that whenever you see another black person that you want to murder, I think that just speaks of a deep crisis of self. And I want to try to speak to that always. Okay, next question.
I'm sorry. I don't know if that was me or there was somebody up there who was before me.
Well, you have the mic, so go for it.
Okay, sorry. I didn't know if there were two. So I have sort of two questions. You can answer either one or both or whatever. They're maybe not necessarily the same. But one question is, how do you or do you like think of your experience and the experience of alienation and of violence and of everything that is being described as something that can also help you relate to other people who have oppression in their lives, like, you know, across the world or something, like how that legacy of colonialism has a unity with, like, you know, other people of color or transgender people or, you know, different subjectivities that have to deal with violence. I guess I'll just ask that question.
I was playing a show, I think it was in 2012 in Zagreb, Croatia. And I was hanging out with this kid who was like, my grandfather who died at 94 lived in 6 different countries by the time he died, and he never left Zagreb. So they had been occupied so many times. And I find that white people, he was white, Jewish people, people who have been occupied, people who have existed in extreme states of colonization and of violence, Palestinian people who are being currently occupied. I think that, I mean, my experience is that my work and my project speaks to those people. Not all of them. I don't think my work is going to speak to all, you know, it's a particular kind of thing. But I've had people be very moved. Like there were the indigenous people in Canada. I did this other piece of Speculum Aurum, which is a requiem for the transatlantic slave trade. And there was all this stuff about the slaves not eating on slave ships. I mean, which is why the Speculum Aurum was developed. It's the device to force feed captured African slaves. That I found going around doing that piece in Canada and various places in the United States and in Europe, that people were dealing with, like in Guantanamo Bay at the time, like people were on hunger strikes and they were being force-fed. In prisons in California, people were on hunger strikes and they were being force-fed. So I think, unfortunately, if you make work about genocide and or extreme violence, there's always, that's going on somewhere in the world. It's not, you know, a Rihanna song, but it's just where I'm particularly interested. So I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that there is this is something that Toni Morrison said, by being very specific, you can be very universal. And that's been my approach. Before I heard that quote, I was like, oh, I like that quote, that's great. That's what I've been doing for years, trying to be very specific, because I think there's an exacting nature that one should have with one's work. And then I think that maybe universal things happen. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Wallace down front had a question. I had a chance to meet Mr. Wallace in South by Southwest this year. I played, I had this thing that was it's very embarrassing to say the name, actually. It was called Gay by Gay Gay, and I sort of had this horrible vision of all these white gay men, like, sort of running this thing. But I was pleasantly surprised to find that they were all women, lesbian women, maybe some trans men too, but yeah, like, not white gay men who were in charge of it. But it's in Austin, so maybe that's just what they do, you know, like, the gay thing becomes a universal thing for, anyway, I can't deal with the gay. I mean, that terminology just troubles me deeply. Mr. Wallace. And Mr. Wallace is an amazing musician, rapper, and yeah, he was just like bringing it hard. South by Southwest in 2 performances I saw. You should check him out if you.
Thank you for
don't know
the
him.
plug. That was awesome.
Yeah.
I really love the performance. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And my question is the part in the piece where you're talking about the sexual nature of the relationship between the black and the white, and you said, I think the phrase was, I didn't know he wore the hood.
Oh yeah, Lord.
That's something that really brought a lot up for me, because I, as a person who has identified as a gay man but no longer does, but has engaged in sex with other men.
That's so exciting that we can
interracially.
evolve. That's it. I don't remember your question, but like, you could start out with like that gay thing, but then realize it's limiting. Anyway.
Yeah,
Go.
I'm a faggot, so my project's called Faggot. It's coming out
Awesome.
soon.
Yeah, we love
And
you.
that's what I go by.
Yeah, we love that.
But
Me too.
anyway, it really hit me because I've experienced a lot of men, white men, who've said things like, you know, I want to be your slave, or, you know, I want that big black cock, which is like all, you know, porn, etc.
Oh yeah, that's that's another song. Nigga dick, don't you want that nigga dick, nigga
Yes.
nigga sperm, shooting from my trigger firm. I guess I have 8 songs. Yeah.
Oh, you have
Tucker
a
says
song
I
that
have
says
8.
nigger dick. Ace says nigger dick and slick.
Sorry, what?
In Banjo Reports, Slick Slicky, Ace says
Hey.
nigger dick. That's
We got to
it.
collab.
We
Maybe
have
I'll
to
sing a
collab,
hook
maybe.
on one of your tracks or something.
But I often find that those same individuals, like even if they don't say those things, a lot of times, you know, you're engaged in a relationship with someone and you're being very intimate, and it is a freeing feeling. Like, you know, like you're supposed to be my enemy, you know, a racial traitor, and you're engaged with me in this very intimate way. But then all of a sudden it's like, black boys are so cute, and black this is so that, and black dick and big black dick, and it's like, oh wait, you're a white supremacist and you don't know it. Like,
Yeah.
like,
I mean, negrophilia and white supremacy have always been like linked. I mean, we know that all these, you know, Klans members, you know, back in the day, had a slave girl, you know, black slave girl. They were doing it. You know, this is like well documented. I mean, it's. I'm sorry, what?
Plan's not during slavery.
Well, yeah, but I mean, but the same mentality of like, you know, slave owner, you know, like, you know, the plantation master having, you know, these women, and then they have these lovely little interracial babies. I mean, I think negrophilia is a thing that our culture hasn't fully. I mean, that's one of my projects, actually. I mean, I have this new video. Charlie Looker's out there. We have a project that we're doing. We're doing this show, these string arrangements. He's doing these string arrangements for me, and then we have this one thing that we've done already called Yo My Cracker. Actually, that was a little bit in the show, and the whole thing is about the video that I made for it is a reaction to the Miles Everett collection, and he's this negrophile who, much like Robert Mapplethorpe, but prefigures Robert Mapplethorpe in photographing exclusively black men, naked, with their dicks hard, with cum coming out of their dicks, or pre-cum, or this old creepy white guy, super old, just super creepy, fully like engaged in stereotypical fantasies about blackness. It's a difficult thing to negotiate. I mean, I've certainly engaged in these kinds of like dynamics with white men, certainly. not, luckily, not a white man that I'm really, have a more intimate thing, like more of a touch and go situation, right? A drive-by, if you will. And that could be interesting. I mean, I find those situations to be interesting in terms of research. If you can get these people to say all kinds of, actually phone sex. There are phone sex lines you can call and then just sort of just throw out oh yeah, I'm a black dude, blah, blah, blah. And then just see what kinds of messages, just what kinds of things come back to you in terms of big black cock, I want to be your slave. The dominant theme around this kind of negrophilia and white supremacy seems to be this reversal of you are the all-powerful black man. It is really you who is more, my dick is so small, I'm this pathetic little white boy, and my dick is so small. This is what they say, this is the white supremacist imagination, this isn't me. These are white men saying, and you've heard, but this is
I've heard all of those things.
My dick is so small and I'm so inadequate and I just need you, the true man in the world, to sort of bring it. And the thing that's really deep to me is when other black people are involved in that same kind of thing. I think that's a more difficult thing to talk about, black men who want you to bring it. I want to be digged down, or whatever the terminology, whatever they might be saying on the, I'm out of the loop on that front a little bit. But, so there's always new terminology. But, I'm more interested, because negrophilia in a way is a thing, from white people is a thing we understand. But the drive for a certain kind of black masculinity, a certain kind of thug, there's all this request for a thug kind of black masculinity, I think is not doing us any favors as black people in terms of breaking out of a certain kind of hyper-masculine construction. I think that we have to really get in touch with the fact that is a construction of white supremacy, and that's the making of a white supremacist imagination, the hyper-masculine black man.
Simultaneously with a profound negrophobia.
Negrophobia, yeah.
A deep death drive manifested not only in it's emotional, but the horrific but anachronistic fears expressed by the murderous young male person who shot up St. Emmanuel in Charleston, the fantasies and the cultivated terror of black dick in white pussies ruining our women is the flip side of the fantasy. In this, to refer to a different song of yours, that desire for the thug has to either be redeemable or disposable, right? So he was a savage of noble negation.
Bring it now.
Right? Selling sneakers and underwear.
Yeah. The verse I love though from that's a song called Plantation Fantasy. He was a savage of Negro negation, Negro athlete, rapper, redeemer, capitalist, capture, contained, sells you sneakers and underwear. But the verse I love is Caucasian neo-colonist, wanting to freak with the freakiest, seeking and searching for the scariest, thugged out nigga pussy terrorist. That could have been a rapper too, right?
Yes, God, yes. We're collaborating, yes. Come through.
Anyway, I think that, this whole, the question of white people and their negrophilia is one thing, but black people requiring a certain performance of masculinity within their anonymous sex, sort of seekings, is more concerning to me.
Well, that was where I was going with it, because then later on you're talking about the whipping, and you're talking about Ma whipped me. She was the black cracker, and I think that's something that I had a lot of questions about that, because I use a term all the time that my friend Ace loves, and people always freak out when I say it, but I'm always like, these white niggers, and for you to call her the mom, the black cracker, I think is really telling, because I think black people sometimes do work as white supremacists.
Oh my Lord, yes.
In a really crazy way with the respectability politics and everything, but then in just kind of training you on how to be, in this white world, or in the world that is right.
Bell Hooks has this great moment that she says patriarchy has no gender, but I also think that white supremacy has no race. That I think we are all in some ways perpetuating white supremacy at all times, and I'm just deeply concerned about the ways in which, we are, black people with each other, like inflicting white supremacy on, and our children, in ways in which we sort of like raise our children.
I'm sorry to embarrass. I'm just passing this off so that anybody who wants a mic that can't get to the mic,
yeah.
Get this one. I'll just.
Is it my turn?
It's your turn.
Yeah, I'm Adam. Nice to
Hi,
meet you
Adam.
guys. I guess my question is in some way tethered to the question surrounding negrophilia and also the conversation around masking, or dual consciousness, because I see it as like a form of, or in response to, as a defense mechanism against like a history of violence where if you are in some way like subjugated, then masking functions as like a tool to assimilate, or like Franz Fanon talks about it, William Popel talks about it in his essay Boccio. But I think my question, if I can phrase it properly, I'm curious as to how you see using like the commodity or like the function of Gothic, which to me is almost like a white convention of blackness, the fear of blackness, or it seems like it's not too different from like the menacing black.
No, I don't understand your definition of goth. Can you?
No, not necessarily like Gothic, like black, or like the use of blackness, or like
talking about monsters and those kinds of things.
Right, like black metal, death metal, rock. Right, and I mean, I've been looking at or like reading a lot of James Baldwin, for example, and he's like one of the few people that I've found that critically talks about like blackness in church, and I think it begins there, the dichotomy between heaven, hell, God, Satan, and I think goth is in direct conversation with that, and I'm curious as to see how you use that.
Yeah, I started thinking of myself as a devil-worshipping free black man in the blues tradition when I encountered this moment in Angela Davis's book, Black Feminism and the Blues Legacies, I think is what the book is called. And she just makes the point that when emancipation happened from slavery, the blues was born in direct response to the enforced Christianity that was a part of what it meant to be a slave. Like Christianity was this thing that was forced upon you as a slave. And certainly black people were subverting it and doing all kinds of things, but the next show is about all the subversion, in a way, of this Christian tradition. But the blues, I mean, to me, at its core, is not about pentatonic scales or 12 bars or blue, whatever. In terms of those musical, mathematical terms, it's about a certain kind of emancipation that's connected to or response to the enforced Christianity. So, I mean, for me, I think the black people in America were, in fact, the first goths. That all of the sort of modern Gothic movements or heavy metal movements owe everything to the blues tradition. I mean, Black Sabbath is what they started as a blues cover band, and the grandfathers. I think we can we think of Sabbath, right, as the grandfathers of heavy metal, and then that sort of like there's a line that you can with like psych metal or doom metal or black metal. It can all be traced back to Sabbath to some extent, and that deep blues tradition. So I mean, I think that. We are, at least in the U.S. context, the first goths. And the Negro Gothic was about thinking about. I started using that term because I was thinking about the Gothic novel, and the Gothic novel is synonymous with romance and horror. That those things are always existing simultaneously. And I thought, well, the experience of the Negro in the United States seems to be one of romance and horror. The extent to which we fall in love with white supremacy, and then the violent, horrible things that have been through lynching, through mass incarceration, through police assassination.
Because I think what's interesting too is that the way Baldwin talks about it is that that black Christians were quite possibly the first true Christians in the country as well.
It's funny because we were just on a deep Baldwin thing. I wanted to share this Baldwin quote that I just rocks me to my core. The interior life is a real life. The intangible dreams of people have tangible effects on the world. The intangible dreams of people have tangible effects on the world. Baldwin rocks me to my core, and he is, I think so much of what Baldwin had to say about, in the 1960s around kinds of revolutionary things that were happening then applies so much to right now. Because I do think that there has been an awakening and a consciousness around the kinds of mass assassinations that have been happening via the police that have, that I think a lot of things hopefully will change in the world. Unfortunately, lots of more people will have to die. But did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, that's great. Did you have other things to say? Comments, thoughts? Are we really done? I'm just getting started. Oh no, there you go. I must say that there's still all these black people asking questions. I'm so hardened by this, all these Negroes. Some of you probably won't like being referred to as a Negro, so I'm sorry if that's offended you. It's just a history thing. We used to be, you know what I mean? It's a historical thing. What's your question?
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. How would you begin to say deconstruct white supremacy in the system that continues to kill and oppress our peoples?
Like that, blow it up.
Yeah, how would I begin to deconstruct? Jesus Christ. Have you, I just think, I would just say, have you read your Frantz Fanon? Have you read your Bell Hooks? Have you read your Cornel West? The fundamental thing is that, the fundamental question for black people is, how do you come up with some sense of self-worth, of self-esteem, when you've been told that you are ugly, dirty, less intelligent than other people, when you've been despised by the society, and then we see all this kinds of evidence of when Darren Wilson, that white man who shot Mike Brown, said he was like a demon coming at me. Why I find that so useful, horrifying, but useful, is that you really are inside of the mind of the white supremacist, and how blackness is constructed in the white supremacist imagination. So I think all of these police officers who are shooting down all of these black men, and sometimes women, just see, somehow Mike Brown is this superhuman. Like, I'm shooting him 20 times, but he continues to come at me somehow. It's like this thing happening in their minds. It's like, Tucker calls it the white psychotic. There's this white psychosis, I think, happening around race and white supremacy. So I think as black people, we have to sort of find a way to love ourselves, to value ourselves, to lift ourselves up in a self-helpy kind of way. I think there should be a self-help market specifically for black people, really, to sort of work their way out of white supremacy. It's a really deep thing. There's no easy answer to it. And it's a constant process. And a lot of it starts with awareness, valuing yourself, thinking that you are beautiful, that you are smart, that you are fantastic. Not just in a delusional, positive thinking bullshit way, but this is my counter hegemonic, my revolutionary stance is to believe that I am fantastic, that I am so brilliant and smart and beautiful. And this is what we need. Those of you who are going to have children, of course I will not do such a thing. But those black people who will have black children, and some white people will have black children, just love that black child and tell them how beautiful they are and how special they are. I just think that that's what we need so desperately, is a deep and profound love. Cornel West always talks about Martin King as a love warrior, or that justice is what love looks like in public, he always says, that, quoting Martin Luther King. So I think there is a deep kind of love and care that we need, attending to our soul. And I think that the black church, even though I'm a devil-worshipping free black man in the blues tradition, that historically was the only place where black people had any kind of attention to their emotional lives, their interior lives. As James Baldwin said, the interior life is a real life. The church, obviously, if you're a queer, if you're, maybe isn't the place for you. Wasn't the place for you. The church has always had, lots of queer people in varying kinds of degrees of their queerness, at the piano and such. Do you have a question?
Hi.
I guess I have a
Wait, I know you from New School, right? We sit
Yeah.
at all the bell hooks things for the last 2 years. I just somehow always sit next to you.
I know.
It's so exciting. Hi.
Hi, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I guess I have some comments and then a question. First, I want to say, it seems like this work is, for one, I appreciate that you're willing to go to a place so dark and intimate, because I think it's a very scary place for a lot of folks to go, and it's probably, I see a lot of shows, but this is probably the most uncomfortable I've ever felt in my life. and I'm still sitting with that and what that means for.
Talk to me about your discomfort.
Oh
Talk to me about that.
gosh. I thought I was asking the question.
Okay. No, I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah.
No, but no. I think, for one, I think looking at the history of I guess the erotic in subjugation for Black people in this country, and that's something that is, because I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who is a person of color who's interacted sexually with a white person that hasn't had some kind of uncomfortability come up or something like.
Preach.
So I think that I would be lying to say that I hadn't encountered that before. So that's something that is a discourse I don't hear very often, and I think part of that is because it's so deathly uncomfortable. I mean, we're, a whole bunch of things culturally, and also it's just a scary place to go. So there's that. And I guess I wanted to know it's interesting to hear like all of the different resources and all the different things that you're mining intellectually and culturally to come up with this piece, because so much of it is so simple to me. Like, you use very accessible language, and it's like, and it almost feels like there's like this hip hop element of like graffiti and like taking these traditionally like like white supremacist like institutions of opera and all these other things, and you're like putting your own thing into it. So I guess I'm curious, like, if you had like one main takeaway for people walking away from interacting with your piece, especially those who don't always get to hear the following discourse or who don't know you personally. I wonder, like, what do you hope that they gain from seeing it? Because I think, I guess I have my own ideas, but I'm curious what you think.
I mean, when I first, that Jamie Foxx thing, when I heard that, I was like, I should write an essay about how troubling this is. And I mean, I've written essays before that have been published, but that's not really my thing. And then I was like, well, I think I just need to incorporate that into a piece. I mean, how I deal with critically all of the things I encounter is by making work about it and singing. I mean, singing is always one of the I've been trying to get to do this event. I'm doing this thing in LA, the show in April, and I was trying to get Fred Moten to be in conversation with me because he is so brilliant at his work. And we were at this conference where I performed in Glasgow last year, and he said, you're singing about all this horrible stuff, but you're singing your way out of it. I always think that whenever there's singing, there's hope, and certainly in the Black tradition, my Lord, it has been about, singing has been so much about the possibility of hope. And I mean, in terms of and so I think that I want there to be a kind of a quiet meditation that people can have on all this stuff and to sit with it in themselves in a certain kind of way. Like I think my goal isn't to make people uncomfortable, but I think that's good. If it's something that you sit with in a way. I mean, there's no one takeaway. I mean, I think that when one is making work, there are many things I'd like people to leave a performance of mine thinking about and feeling. Because it's not just, because I'm not like an academic or I don't write essays. I mean, it's music, and hopefully it's emotional. And so I would like you to think and feel, but feel first, maybe, I think, about many different kinds of things, about yourself in the world, where you are relative to the revolutionary possibilities that current assassinations of Black people have, introduced to us, like thinking about your positionality as a white person, where you stand as a Black person, like where you are in an evolution of becoming and decolonization as a Black person. But I mean, there's never one. Art is, I think it's an all-encompassing experience, so I would never suggest that there was one thing or one kind of, but hopefully multiple things. Hopefully hopefully you'll be shaken to your core, hopefully. I mean, Cornel West always says when in his class, like, you know, you have come here to die, and learn how to die, meaning that you would like leave behind sort of prosaic ways of thinking about the world, and, you know, sort of make yourself anew. So maybe just like, yeah, having that, you know, some old skin has been shed, and then you can have a new experience. Are there other questions? I feel like I've left Tucker out. You looking for that Baldwin quote? Is that what you're doing in that Baldwin book that we were talking about?
I'm sorry, I was just reading also, but listening too. I mean, but yes, there is a specific line that I did want to share in response to the prior question, which was how does one go about deconstructing white supremacy? And the answer, rightly and understandably, was about and for how Black individuals can do that. But a lot of this load has to be carried by white folks like myself who are the inheritors, like it or not, of a genocide still in progress. That's a lot to do and work on. And it's to recognize the terror that we actually have about admitting how close to that way back then we still really are.
I think that we have I think that any kind of freedom is, or any kind of emancipatory project is, it's all we can ever fight for, and we will probably be unsuccessful. But we have to just keep surging forward, right? I mean, Cornel West always talks about going down fighting. I like the idea of going down fighting and not living in fear. Marcus Garvey's people used to sort of, at their protests, would hold signs, "We are not afraid." I mean, my take on Sandra Bland's encounter with the police was one of not being afraid. I mean, she was very aware of what could happen to her in an encounter with the police, and she was not deferential to the police officer. I think there's this thing about not being afraid and living with the consequences of that. Yeah, there are no answers.
May I ask if the questioner has any thoughts about answers to the question? I mean, that's just my personal interest. If you
Yeah.
We love that shit, yeah.
So, I mean, aside from the fact that we have to live through this trauma every day, it's like a cartoon, it's like a video game. You see people getting killed over and over and over again, and it becomes okay. So now it's just normal. Oh, someone else was killed, cool.
Oh, but we do a double down move on it. This is how white folks work in power. The double down on it is, but then folks have to fight for a year to get a dash cam video released if it shows something too messed up, right? In South Carolina earlier, because the unjustified, entirely shooting of a grandfather on the side of the road in a district that was not even this police officer's responsibility was deemed by the sheriff's department so upsetting, it couldn't be released. Now, that officer then goes to is indicted and is going to trial. Ultimately, the charge was lessened because, of course, the facts and record didn't include this video that was so horrifying. There was genuine fear about triggering trauma for people, but also uprising. In South Carolina, they still think it's going to happen.
And it is.
And so there's on the double down is We play it every 5 minutes. If you watch MSNBC anytime after dark, it is nothing but lockdown and prison reality shows all night long. We won't show the video. We'll show you every video. We won't let you see their face. We might let you say their names. And so there is a way in which those moves, it seems to me, cannot dictate what people and families and parents and communities of color, and specifically here I'm referring to African American peoples and black peoples in the US who are not African American. You can't be watching their moves for yours. Now you have to watch theirs too. That's the double kung fu, and it's fucked. And this is why, of course, Baby Suggs holy and beloved says, put down your sword and shield. It's not a fight, it's a rout.
Okay. My question is, what do you think about your work and how it talks about black parenting? Also, you were just talking about Cornel West's notion of black nihilism and about how you said black people need like something like self-help. How do you think about all these things in relation to like efforts to pathologize the black family?
That is so complicated. I mean, we were just talking about, this is just what we talk about, me and Tucker, the Moynihan Report in the 60s, and its diagnosis was that the problem with the black family is all this matriarchal energy, and they have essentially, this matriarchal energy has emasculated black men. And so we need to somehow, restore the patriarchal nuclear family, that's gonna solve the problem of, the crisis in black life. Nothing about white supremacy, by the way. And knocking women down a bit, certainly. I mean, it's complicated because I think that, my mother, I guess it's just, to some extent, I guess I was saying I'm not, but yeah, when I'm talking about my mother, I'm being autobiographical, actually. And my mother, she was born in the 50s in Alabama, Mobile, Alabama, and she saw some things that, you could just imagine what a black woman, black girl born in the 50s would have seen in Alabama. And there was a trauma that I think that she didn't have language for it. I don't know if we haven't spoken in a while. That's another complicated thing. That she didn't have language for, really. That when I say my grandfather was a sharecropper, he was, actually, in fact, and he was subjected to incredible violence on the plantation. He was born in he's dead now. It's probably a good thing. As much as he was deeply traumatized, you can have varying responses to trauma. Like you can, try to be a decent person even as you are deeply pained. He was not doing that. His enacting of his trauma was to be incredibly violent, which I think is often the response that many black men have to intense trauma is violence. I think that that legacy of a kind of a certain kind of violence that is passed on. That in my family, can't talk about other families, I think it's probably true in some other black families, that the beatings that he was receiving in a sharecropping situation, white landowners, kinds of things, for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, brutalizing. He never talked about it, by the way. We only know about these beatings because of his younger brother, who also experienced those same kinds of traumas. But he was the stoic, strong black man who then just went on to have 10 children and then beat all of his children intensely, rape my grandmother repeatedly. Just a horrible, horrible, violent man. My mother hated him, deeply and profoundly hated him. And to just tell all our business, she, when I stopped talking to her 10 years ago or so, started therapy, which I think, I think anyone starting therapy is a good thing. Looking at yourself in a critical way. And she had repressed the memory of being 13 and being in bed with my grandmother, her mother, as a daughter might get into bed with her mother. And then my grandfather coming home in a rage. There's no name to the rage, it's just this rage. And then raping my grandmother, and my mother being in the bed pretending to be asleep because she was fearful of what would happen to her. I think that there was this moment, James Baldwin, it's his James Baldwin night. He was giving a talk in 1987, I think The Color Purple, the movie, had just come out, and people were asking him about the negative representations of black men, and how sort of horrible that was and concerning. And Baldwin's response was to say, well, I want to know what happened to that black man to make him so violent. Because these things don't happen in a vacuum. It's not like some genetic, in the white supremacist imagination there is this like we are just beasts, who need to be put down. But in actuality, there are things that led to people becoming these horrible, violent people. I think that in our sort of need to dismantle patriarchy, and we need to do that desperately, there needs to be a discourse about the ways in which men are harmed deeply by violence and a lack of being able to be vulnerable. Brené Brown talks about this thing of men being vulnerable as this thing that they're punished by. This is not like a grand revelation, by the way, but I think that many women of all races still are invested, heterosexual women are invested in men being a certain kind of patriarchal thing. And this, I think, does great harm to men. They're not allowed to sort of be in a complex place with their masculinity, with being vulnerable, with like sort of dealing with the feelings of whatever is going on. Certainly my grandfather had no ability to kind of deal with that. Now his younger brother was not a violent, he didn't have ridiculous children, he wasn't like a philandering, horrible, my grandfather just had all kinds of women on the side. He was just like, he was working overtime in terms of being a fucked up, like, patriarchal black man. But his younger brother was a very gentle soul. He did not have that. So he chose not to go that way. But I think maybe his ability to even talk about what had happened to him maybe helped to save him, right? That my grandfather had no language for the things that happened to him. Just in a talk therapy, kind of self-helpy way, I think that we must talk about the things that have happened to us, and that's what, in these particular kinds of histories, to even begin to like undo them, or to heal, and to be able to have what Bell Hooks has also been calling lately optimal well-being, or to exist in a place of optimal well-being.
I would be remiss if I didn't simply add that I don't think you meant to say that promiscuity as such is fucked up.
Oh, no,
ridiculous.
no.
I know. And also, to note the deep ways in which there have been long-standing, ongoing critiques of psychotherapy as a discourse with its own racialized history.
Absolutely.
And I just want to acknowledge that those are
sure. Yeah, it's complicated in terms of healing ourselves. But really the state of emergency and the urgency for us to kind of come to a different kind of consciousness with ourselves and among ourselves as black people, I think is really tantamount. And then there's these other questions of movement. I think that there has to be this, I said earlier, these two things going on at the same time, the abolitionist movement that is ongoing, and then this sort of like need to love self, to sort of have a self-recovery, to be well. It's really, it's... Are there any other questions, thoughts? This is depressing, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, that's how it is. Hi, who's, jump up and yell your question, or someone's gonna give you a microphone.
I have an off-the-wall question. This is kind of inappropriate, maybe, I hope not. Maybe it's
closer to your mouth.
In the middle, I enjoyed your piece. I enjoyed all the insights of people speaking tonight about what the culture is happening right now. But in the middle of your piece, I've never been in this place, and my thought is that this is Cooper Union, and this is the hall that Abraham Lincoln might have spoken into.
Oh yeah, he did. He spoke here, yeah.
So you're speaking maybe in the same spot, it's
yes.
So I thought that made the whole performance piece to me. It just brought the full circle to that you're part of the whole history of Black America. And it just
Well, really of America, though. I mean, the history of America is a history of race. It's not, I mean, there's no, in a way, Black America
Well,
thing.
I'm just talking about this particular stage. And, you know, I could see Abraham Lincoln up there with you trying to speak the same thing. And so that's, you know, it's been going on. I hope that
And if you
wasn't-
walk down the left, way right out of here, I saw it going to the restroom. I mean, there are other figures. I mean, the images of certain Frederick Douglass, as well as John Brown on his way to his death day, his execution. Whether the institution, more than merely symbolically and reverentially, manifests such abolitionist and or radical positions today, I have no idea. But
There is
room
the
has
history.
been very deep and very special. Sorry.
There's the history.
Thank you.
Oh, my. I'm just impressed that so many people have stayed. Did you have questions, or should we end now? Is there an urgent? Is someone feeling urgent about something? Because this is a lot to bring up. I mean, I wouldn't want to just abandon you if you're feeling. Hi, bow tie, red bow tie. What was your question?
Okay about that? One last question? Cool.
I very much enjoyed your program. It was very moving. I don't take any exception to most of what you described as happening in our society. But I am a person who grew up in the South, in a very segregated South. I'm 77 years old. When I came to New York City, there was a very interesting moment when I found myself surrounded on a subway platform by people that in those days we would call Negroes. And having come from the background that I was from, I was frightened. And then I overheard one of these black gentlemen say to another, "Oh, Mary, get over it." And immediately I felt a great sense of relief because I said to myself, "Oh, they're just gay like I am." And that to me is something with someone mentioned double identity that you've totally, I feel, left out. And that is that being gay is an identity which to some degree, I admit there's a lot of racism in the gay community too, but
Lord,
to some
yes,
day
yes, yes.
transcends or gives you something in common with others that I think a lot of people that don't share such a double identity miss out on, because it has enabled me to have many black friends, many Latino friends, all kinds of people that I would have never met or known if I had not been fortunate enough to be a homosexual.
It's interesting. Stephen Winter, a dear friend of mine, is a filmmaker. He actually directed one of my videos, music videos, the video for Speculum Aurum. Told me the story. He was like, I think 18 or 19, and he was jogging in Chicago. He's from Chicago. And he was wearing a pair of pink short shorts in jogging. And the police stopped him because they thought, you know, he looked like someone that a person of interest for them. This has happened. I mean, it's happened to me. Apparently, I look like, you know, someone who, apparently most of us look like a person of interest if we were black, and there's a police officer present. And he talked about the fact that he just kind of queened out a little bit in that moment, and then I was reflecting on the fact that maybe that saved his life. Maybe he wasn't shot down by the police officer because of perceived homosexuality. And there's a bigger question or bigger sort of issue around that in terms of like the construction of hyper black masculinity, and it's the construction that many of us black men have, you know, decided to run with, but it's a construction of the white supremacist imagination. And it's that thing that the white people have constructed that they also fear. Because, I mean, in this case, you've just described, like, oh, I see black people and I imagine that I might be unsafe until I see a kind of a Nelly, Queenie kind of affect, and then I feel at home. And I think that it's not just because you were also a homosexual, but I think that many people in our culture somehow feel less threatened when the masculinity that is black is not a thugged out nigga pussy terrorist kind of.
I think that's a little unfair to the narrative we just heard, insofar as
Okay.
it wasn't just an affect he observed; it was you were spoken to, right? And there was an address, and that was a mutual recognition, a recognition that you could be spoken to in that way. Get over it. And thus something became possible. And I think it is worth, first of all, just hearing and acknowledging both, the objections of holding open certain space for certain peoples to find an encounter with multiracial and multidimensional, broadly, populations within spaces marked out specifically for sexual minorities.
Sure.
Not your thing.
It's really not.
Right.
But I mean, sure.
But
I don't necessarily disagree.
Again, it's his experience. I mean, I'm just honoring and acknowledging what.
No. And I think that was. I appreciate the comment. I think it's really instructive for us in many ways. I think that encounter, but for me, yeah, I'm just interested in. I don't feel some grand affinity with like people because they're homosexuals. I just don't. I don't feel a grand. I actually do feel a grand affinity with all black people, even the black people who hate me and despise me. I love all black people, not because they love me in return, but because they are worthy of loving. But I guess I just don't feel the same way about. I have an objection. I just personally, gay culture is not my thing. Like I don't find there's like possibilities of whatever. I just don't think there's any grand communion because you like to fuck, similar bodied people. Like I just don't. I get that like there's been a grand kind of movement to sort of like allow me to walk down the street with my boyfriend, like and not be murdered. Although we could still be, particularly by hypermasculine black people, probably more likely because we're like an interracial couple or something. But I acknowledge that, and I want to like give respect and due to that. But the whole gay trip is just not my. I just don't feel anything. I'm sorry for all the gay people in the room who are. And I know that there are some people who have been very vigilant in the struggle from Stonewall to to now with questions of like the bourgeoisization of gay people. I guess I'm excited by the fact, that at one point, gay people were very concerned about police violence, right? Stonewall was essentially a response to police violence. I wish that the gay people and as a community were as up in arms about police violence now as they were when it was directly affecting them. So, yeah, just because I just can't, I just don't want to negotiate that kind of deep, like, racism that I feel is happening in mainstream gay culture. Just, it's not my trip. Sorry. I don't want to disrespect anyone who's, been on the front lines of that. Hi, Jim. Of course he would have comment about that. We said one last question, but Jim should, should totally speak in this moment because he has been,
My question's a serious one, as all the questions have been, but I'm wondering how you look at the ability of white institutions to fetishize an artist like yourself and to present to mostly white people. Mm-hmm. And what does that do to your psyche? And how do you dance around that? Because at least they pay you, which is fundamentally important. But I'm just trying to understand the role of these cultural institutions who will put you on and yet not change their institution.
Sure. I think that most of these arts institutions are bottom feeding. They're opportunistic. They want to sort of feel as if they're on the vanguard of something. But this is true for any artist presenting work, whether you're black, white, or whatever. The people in power in institutionalized places like this or PS1 or whatever, they want to feel as if what they're presenting is relevant to some conversation. And so, I think that most curators and presenters, and Sebastian, who brought me here, is an exception. I think that Sebastian's also an artist and a social activist. I don't include Sebastian in this critique of these institutions, but it's very complicated. I certainly enjoy being paid. Although you didn't pay to get in here, I'm certainly being paid tonight, and that's very helpful because one has to live in. One doesn't have to live in New York City, but it just so happens I live here, and there's rent, and it's very expensive here. So I'm very happy to be paid. I don't have any. I would be doing this work, and I have been before I was doing it in institutions like this. I'd be in a basement somewhere, or at Death by Audio, or so. Well, there you go. I mean, I'm going to be doing this work regardless of whether these institutions care or not. I guess I'm lucky in the sense that these gigs pay better than the basement shows. And so it's more helpful to keep the work going forward. But I have I know what I'm getting myself into. Like, I know that there is a fetishization of whatever it is that I'm bringing. I think that there is an inherent critique in my work of that very thing, of that kind of negrophilia, if you will. So, yeah, I mean, it's like one of those states of contradiction that we all have to live in. I mean, arts institutions are fucked. I mean, I just think that there's a lack of vision, there's a lack of like insight. With rare exceptions, there are few places where people actually have some political position relative to like whatever they're presenting. Very few places, like maybe one or two in New York. It's a place of contradiction we have to live. We live with this, and we have to surge on. I mean, I am a person who makes things. I've been making things whether anyone was here or not. I've been performing somewhere, and so I mean, why not here? Why not another? I mean, I'll be in a basement again soon. Why live in a basement? So there's that. But anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for your tireless work in putting this together. Thank you to Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
And Sabin Calvert, the art director for this show. Thank you, Tucker Culbertson, for being in this moment with me. It means so much to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.